yang bertua, taman cinta merdeka, kasih di hatiku ini untuk tanah pertiwi, dari utara selatan juga timur ke barat, Lut Gagah sama Sarawak, sehati sejiwa. Ku dengarkan rindu Bayu Kinabalu, ku dengar sumpahmu Rejang yang membiru, bersatu denganku, tegak titi bangsa Malaysia, sehati sejiwa. Laut luas terbentang, bukan satu halangan untuk kita bersama bernafas jadi setia. Demimu Malaysia, cinta kasih di jiwa, tidak akan kami hianatinya. Walaupun berbeza gaya agama, bukanlah penghalang kita bergandingan. Marilah bersatu, sehati sejiwa. Malaysia kekal sejahtera. Soginabo, kita dekat menuju Nidi Soginabo, letak ke benua Nidi Soginabo, yuk kita mulia. Malaysia sehati sejiwa. Malaysia sehati sejiwa.
Nelayan dan juga petani, gaya hidup ini dah berubah. Anak-anak terasuh indahnya, lahir generasi bijak andal. Pakar IT, pakar ekonomi, jago sukan dan juga jutawan. Berkereta jenama negara, bergerak menyusut di jalan raya. Alam cyber teknologi terkini, kejayaan semakin hampiri. Tiap di kota ataupun desa, kita semua mesti merasa bangga. Keranamu kami mendapat Tuhan, keranamu kami bangsa berjaya, keranamu kami hidup selesa, tanpa bukti kemakmuran negara. Keranamu kami bebas merdeka, keranamu nyawa dipertaruhkan, keranamu bila kami berjuang demi bangsa kedaulatan negara. Merah utara semangat wajah, putihmu bersih budi pekerti, kuning berdaulat payung negara, biru perpaduan kami semua. Bangsa dunia telah kau kawal, lautan luas telah kau redam. putih rakyat Malaysia. Jalur gemilang megahkan di kerasan, jalur gemilang ibaratkanlah wawasan kita putih biru kuning, jalur semangat kami semua.
Dunia kan berubah, perubahan melingkari, melaksana hasrat hati, kejayaan terbukti. Dunia yang megah dengan misi yang gagah, kerana perpaduan kita masih bersama. Kita satu bangsa, kita satu negara, kita satu mahkamah. Kita satu bangsa, satu negara, kita satu Malaysia. Kita satu bangsa, kita satu negara, kita satu mahkamah. Kita satu bangsa, satu negara, kita satu Malaysia.
What is ethics? The term ethics is derived from the Greek word ethos, which originally means custom or character. Broadly construed, ethics is a branch of philosophy that studies the rightness or wrongness of a human action. In particular, this branch of philosophy is concerned with questions of how human persons ought to act, and the search for a definition of right conduct and the good life. It is for this reason that the attempt to seek the good through the aid of reason is the traditional goal of ethicists. It must be noted, however, that there is no single absolute definition of ethics. This is because ethics as a discipline is constantly evolving as a result of a change in socio-cultural and political context. For example, in the Greek tradition, ethics was conceived as relating to the concept of the good life. Thus, the ethical inquiry during this time was directed toward discovering the nature of happiness. In fact, Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics does not only present a theory of happiness, but also provides ways in which happiness is attained. Now, centuries later, a quite different orientation was introduced by the Judeo-Christian tradition. In this ethical tradition, the ideals of righteousness before God and the love of God and neighbor, not the happy or pleasant life, constitute the substance of ethics. Indeed, if we make an effort to reconcile these views, we are faced with the difficult task of defining the relationship between doing what is right and being happy. Again, it is for this reason that we cannot have an absolute definition of ethics. The least that we can do, in my opinion, is to describe the nature and dynamics of ethics based on a specific time and context. It is also important to note that ethics is not the same with morality, although many philosophers believe that the two terms can be used interchangeably. This is because the former denotes the theory of right action and the greater good, while the latter indicates practice, that is, the rightness or wrongness of a human action. In other words, ethics undertakes the systematic study of the underlying principles of morality. Hence, it is interested primarily in the illustration of a more general problem and the examination of underlying assumptions and the critical evaluation of moral principles. Morality, on the other hand, is more prescriptive in nature. It tells us what we ought to do and exhorts us to follow the right way. According to Terence McConnell, morality is characterized as an end-governed rational enterprise whose object is to equip people with a body of norms that make for peaceful and collectively satisfying coexistence by facilitating their living together and interacting in a way that is productive for the realization of the general benefit. For example, a religious leader may ask her followers to be good at all times. In this way, a moralist may want to keep alive the values she considers to be worthwhile and to improve the moral quality of the community where she belongs. Hence, morality, at the very least, aims to guide one's action by reason and gives equal weight to the interests of each individual affected by one's decision. Indeed, this gives us a picture of what it really means to be a morally upright person. And so we may conclude that ethics is the science of morals, while morality is the practice of ethics. During the mid-20th century, according to Sumner, a certain theory in the methodology of ethics has gradually become more and more widely accepted, at least by British and American moral philosophers. According to this position, there are two ways of doing ethical inquiry, namely normative ethics and meta-ethics. On the one hand, normative ethics is prescriptive in nature, as it seeks to set norms or standards that regulate right and wrong or good and bad conduct. This may involve articulating the good habits that we should acquire, the duties that we should follow, or the consequences of our behavior on others. Hence, normative ethics normally attempts to develop guidelines or theories that tell us how we ought to behave. For example, Immanuel Kant's claim that an act is morally right if it is done for the sake of duty is an example of a normative ethics. Meta-ethics, on the other hand, is descriptive in nature. According to Sumner, meta-ethics is allegedly constituted, at least in part, by questions of the meanings of the various ethical terms and functions of ethical utterances. Hence, if a normative ethical inquiry is evaluative and prescriptive, meta-ethics is analytical and descriptive. Put simply, meta-ethics is a type of ethical inquiry that aims to understand the nature and dynamics of ethical principles. It asks questions about the nature and origin of moral facts, as well as the way in which we learn and acquire moral beliefs. Thus, for example, if normative ethics urges us to do good at all times, meta-ethics asks the question, what is good? For sure, if a moral philosopher attempts to address the questions, what is good, what is justice, why should I be moral, then that moral philosopher is doing metaethics. Hence, when Plato proposed an answer to the question, "Why should I be moral?" Plato was doing metaethics. Indeed, Plato raised a metaethical question. In the course of the development of ethics, applied ethics became its third major type. As its name suggests, applied ethics is the actual application of ethical or moral theories for the purpose of deciding which ethical or moral actions are appropriate in a given situation. For this reason, casuists, that is, the adherents of applied ethics, are concerned with individual moral problems such as abortion or euthanasia, and attempt to resolve the conflicting issues that surround these particular moral problems. Casuists may also act on some occasions in an advisory capacity, such as guiding individuals in their choice of actions. For example, they may attempt to resolve the conflicting duties of a mother suffering from ectopic pregnancy who has no other option than to abort the fetus. Applied ethics is usually divided into different fields. For example, we may talk about business ethics, which deals with ethical behavior in the corporate world, biomedical and environmental ethics, which deal with issues relating to health, welfare, and the responsibility we have toward people and our environment, and social ethics, which deals with the principles and guidelines that regulate corporate welfare within societies. Finally, the difference between the three major types of ethics can be illustrated in the following situation. A police officer shoots a terrorist who is about to blow up a crowded shopping mall. The act of the police officer is morally wrong according to metaethics, because it is always wrong to kill. As is well known, killing in itself is intrinsically wrong. However, if the police officer does not shoot the terrorists, many innocent people will die or get injured. Though the police officer's act may be wrong, the adherents of normative ethics may say that it is the right thing to do in this particular situation, because not doing so will result in the death of so many people. Hence, the action might be morally correct. Finally, the casuists may say that the police officer is just doing his best to fulfill his duty, that is, to protect as many innocent lives as possible. All right, that's it for today. Keep looking forward to our series of daily whiteboard editions as we try to make the learning and understanding of philosophy incredibly easy.
Just consider for a moment. You feel pressure regarding your class grade and have an opportunity to turn in work that's not your own to get ahead. You can tell a friend an important truth, but which also might end the friendship. You recognize that the continuing use of fossil fuels in cars and planes contributes to climate change, and yet you want to get where you need to go. You wonder about the implications of placing your child in a new charter school with higher testing scores as opposed to supporting your own neighborhood school. Or you see an interaction at a party between a man and a woman that seems off, and you wonder whether you should intervene. We face challenges in life, large and small, that if we listen closely, ask ethical questions of us. What are my principles? What are my values? What do I stand for? These questions ask us to consider our obligations to ourselves and to others. They require decisions and actions. And in turn, these decisions and actions form a part of who we are, or our character, as ethical persons. But how well equipped are we to respond to these challenges? On what basis do we tell a friend a painful truth as opposed to engaging in deceit, or decide to intervene to help someone in need? More generally, how do we know what it means to live a good life? As a philosopher, ethicist, and educator, I'm interested in how we recognize these questions, but also how we learn to respond to them well. So you're probably familiar with what an educator is, right? One who teaches, and perhaps you've met a philosopher before too, although we're exotic species of some kind, right? But the ones who ask big questions. But you might be wondering, what is an ethicist? Well, there's many kinds of us. So there are business ethicists who consider the place of ethics in the workplace and corporate and financial sectors. There are research ethicists who discuss the importance of integrity in research practices and consider the broader implications of the research we produce. And there are bioethicists who consider the ethical implications of biomedical research, stem cell research, for example, or human impacts on the environment, just through GMOs. But at his or her core, the ethicist is one who cares and thinks deeply about matters of right and wrong, and about how we can choose ethically better as opposed to ethically problematic courses of action in life. So when I refer to the ethicist, I'm not referring to some magical person or saint who always knows and does and can tell others the good, nor am I referring to an exclusive class of people licensed by a university, hospital, or business to practice ethics. Rather, the ethicist, or the everyday ethicist, as I refer to it, can be found in our homes, in our streets, and in our schools. The everyday ethicist can be a friend, family member, acquaintance, or stranger. The everyday ethicist is all of us, insofar as we recognize, encounter, and respond to the ethical issues that arise in our own lives. Now, one doesn't need a doctorate in moral philosophy to recognize this. Many of you will probably already have considered the everydayness of ethics in your own life. And I'm consulted with by undergraduate students on a regular basis regarding ethical issues that they face in their life. Just some recent examples. I had a discussion with a student about conflict that she was experiencing about respecting the wishes of her parents and choosing her own course of study here at Penn State. Another student who was conflicted about loyalty to his partner and the desire to end a long-term relationship. And another student who's concerned about Penn State's investment in fossil fuels and how to push Penn State towards investment in cleaner energy. But my point is not just that ethical issues are prevalent in our lives. Many of us will probably have already thought about that. But that, to take a step further, it's possible to develop better or worse answers to these challenges and questions, right? We can act unethically, so in ways that perhaps we regret and hopefully we learn from. And we can act ethically in ways that promote the good. And although there's no single answer to deciding between those two options, one way to respond is to cultivate our own ethical awareness and to develop the skills needed to act ethically. Now, ideally, school, which is one of the most significant socializing experiences we have, will play a useful role in helping us to respond to ethical challenges, right? We go to school, at least in part, to prepare us for adulthood, to give us a variety of skills, academic, social, personal, that allow us to understand our world and ourselves. To this end, we get training in a variety of academic subjects and an informal curriculum of extracurricular activities, clubs, sports, and so on. But what we generally don't receive is training in ethics education. Nor in an era of maxed out curricula and standardized testing do we really even leave open space for frank and honest discussion about the ethical issues that we face in life. Now, this lack of attention to ethics has serious implications. Now, in the book Lost in Transition, The Dark Side of Emerging Adulthood, Christian Smith, who's a sociologist from the University of Notre Dame, discusses the results of thousands of survey interviews and hundreds of in-person interviews that he conducted with emerging adults, ages 13 to 23, regarding their understanding of ethics. And two things became clear from these interviews. One, that children and adolescents often do raise ethical questions in class, right, about the issues they face in the hallway, their own lives, the curriculum they're being taught. But these questions are often sidestepped and avoided in the classroom by teachers and administrators in order to try and avoid controversy. Thus, Smith notes that the moral pedagogy of most middle and high schools, or many middle and high schools, seems to be avoid, ignore, and pretend the issues will go away. But the flip side of this avoidance is the failure to engage in useful ethics education opportunities, right? To educate and have teachers and children realize that it's possible to both critically and respectfully engage in dialogue about ethical issues, and that just as we develop skills in other areas in school, we can develop skills, say reasoning and empathic skills, that can help us to develop as ethical persons. And second, and related to the first, it became clear that many of the interviewees didn't possess the tools to adequately address the ethical issues that they were facing in their life. So in discussion of issues ranging from cheating on a test to obligations to help others in need, over 60% of the interviewees discuss ethics as, and what's right or wrong, as entirely up to each individual. Now, personal beliefs, opinions, and intuitions are vitally important in motivating us to act ethically in the world and in developing our own ethical understanding. But to think of all ethics and all matters of right and wrong as completely up to each individual can be challenging when it comes to taking an ethical stand as a community, right, not just as individuals, against things that actually are ethically wrong. So here I'm thinking about assessing and taking an ethical stand against sexual assault, against terrorism, against institutional racism, and so on. So what I'm arguing here is not that personal opinions and beliefs aren't important, because they're vitally important. And it's important to respect those differences. Think about and think deeply about certain ethical foundations, those based in basic human rights, right? Or caring and compassion for others, for example, that allow us to make basic assessments of right and wrong and allow us to make moral judgments. And this sense of judgment, and there's multiple senses of the term, is not based in self-righteous castigation of another person or community. It's based in a desire to understand, discuss, and evaluate ethical beliefs, and do the sometimes hard work required to make good ethical decisions. But this distinction can be lost without any attention to ethics education. So what I'm advocating for here is not a universal set of ethical beliefs for all people, nor a map that solves all of our ethical problems, because no such map exists. What I am arguing is that it would be important for us to educate our children and adolescents to respect the many ethical beliefs and values there are in the world, to be properly humble about their place in a broader community, but also to be willing to recognize and stand up for their own ethical convictions. So what I also want to note here is that if we're worried about the controversy of introducing ethics into schools, we'll do well to recognize that children too are everyday ethicists. That is, when we're talking ethics with kids, we're not introducing something wholly new, right? If we're doing our work well, we're recognizing the ethical concerns that children already have, and we're building from those concerns to help them develop as ethical people. So in a project that I run called Philosophical Ethics in Early Childhood, or the PEACH project, we're very happy about how that acronym turned out, right? We spend a lot of time talking ethics with 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. And we use children's literature, artwork, and games to motivate those discussions. And what I find in that work, and my colleagues find as well, is that from a young age, children possess ethical convictions and ethical ideas. They have ideas about fairness, about inclusion and exclusion, about what's right and wrong, right? So to give you an example, in a recent discussion I had with a young girl, age 4, in the class I was working with, I asked her about why she would or would not include a new child into her play group, right? It's a hypothetical girl named Christina. And she said she would include this girl in a play group because she knew it would make her feel good. And so it was the right thing for her to do. And she went on to draw a picture of what this would look like for her, right? And not only is it just a beautiful picture, so it's just worth it for that reason, it's also clear that she's here expressing this sense of community that she's trying to build and why she thinks it's important to include this girl into her friend group, right? So what became clear to me from this discussion and many others is that children possess a sharp ethical awareness. This is evident historically, for example, in children of the civil rights movement who participated in school desegregation in tremendously brave ways and in many ways that adults failed to do. But it's also evident in our more common daily conversations with kids when we use children's literature, such as Frog and Toad and The Giving Tree, and children raise questions and insights about issues of fairness, honesty, loyalty, respect, and many other ethical values, right? And one of children's greatest strengths in these conversations that adults often lack, actually, is the ability to be imaginatively present, to care about the story in a way in which they almost talk with the characters, and to care about the outcome in a vital way. And in this sense, ethics doesn't need to be a mere exercise or a separate discipline for children. It can be an outgrowth of their imagination and their daily present concerns. Right? So what I am advocating for here today is that we think about the presence of ethical concerns in our life and the possibility of ethics education as being a positive and helping us to address and think more deeply about those concerns. And hopefully redouble our efforts to build an ethical community both within and beyond our schools. Thanks very much.
Assalamualaikum. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi